else.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, we have audio back on. Sorry about that, just coordinating some last-minute logistics. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this presentation on Infor's Lawson Cloud Solution. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started. What we're doing today is a live split-screen webinar. You should be able to toggle in the middle of your screen your split to make the presentation bigger or us bigger. We recognize the TV is a little bit far back. It'll be hard to see the presentation from there. So obviously, toggle accordingly. We're going to close it up to not create that virtual loop. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please type them into the GoToMeeting module, either the questions or the chat. Ms. Brittany Degler, who's our host today, will ask the questions as time allows or towards the end. We'll try to address everything you have. And we are recording this presentation. We will be distributing that. It takes us a little time to reformat the recording into a viable video that we can put online. So, give us a few days. And obviously, we're always happy to share copies of the presentation. My name is Keith Wayland. I will be one of your presenters today. I'm a partner with RPI Consultants. Very excited to have Greg Pollard, another partner with RPI Consultants and longtime co-conspirator, in front of the camera today. Greg's hands are basically on everything that happens at RPI. Usually he stays behind the scenes. He's been following this cloud trend very closely, always very curious about market trends and corporate strategies, but also a resident skeptic. So I thought it'd be very healthy to have him here today. Exactly. I'm very excited to have the conversation. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. High-level overview of our agenda, which, if I can get a clicker to work, will be awesome. All right, here we go. Now, I realize that a lot of you out there, especially representing IT departments, you probably have other business applications in the cloud. You've been studying these trends a lot more closely than we necessarily have in the Lawson space. But we want to make sure that we go through and define and define what each one of these means in terms of general terms and also as it relates to Infor's Cloud before we start talking about the options and whether they're good fits or not for your organization. Okay? This is our disclaimer slide here today. I feel like we have a pretty good concept of what all these terms mean, even though a lot of them overlap. But one of the challenges we found as we were starting to put together the PowerPoint was doing it in such a way that it was cohesive in nature and it didn't seem like we're going back and forth. Certainly this is the first time we do this presentation. We welcome feedback so that we can improve upon it. Definitely something we'd like to make better. But also ask questions along the way if anything gets confusing. The other half of this disclaimer is we don't represent Infor. We're a third-party consulting company. We've been in this business for a long time. And obviously we observe both what Infor puts out and what we talk to our customers about. And what we're sharing here is the facts as we know them, and obviously our opinions as they affect that. So, again, not representing Infor. I will try to do a quick about RPI slide here and say for those of you that don't know us, we've been in business since 1999. We're Lawson Professional Services. You can tell we must be a good company because we force everybody to come to Baltimore and smile for a picture. This picture is actually about a year old today. And there's actually a lot of new resources, a lot of them technical, that are not represented in this picture, but we still use it because it's a very important part of our identity. And what we feel is big distinguishing factors, instead of just allocating an individual resource that's going to fit all needs for a specific project, we take a team-based approach. Anybody that works with one of our consultants, there's a lot of us that are behind the scenes supporting them. We have a lot of interaction, and we have a lot of conversations about things that happen in projects and unique challenges. And part of what allows us to do these presentations is that we're constantly talking about what we see out there. So we hope that it creates a value add from our service delivery and that those of you that have worked with us have experienced that. So as Stout says, without further ado, let's get to the presentation. And we'll start with one basic question, which is, what is the cloud? Well, a cloud is a mass of condensed water vapor in the sky, of course. So for the purposes of our presentation today, we're using the cloud in the metaphorical sense, where it basically talks about a hosted, utility-based deployment strategy. Obviously, that's quite the mouthful. But basically, it involves deploying groups of remote servers and software that allows centralized data storage and online access to these services. As a foundation, it's a broader concept of converged infrastructure and shared services. Basically, we're looking to maximize the effectiveness of these shared resources by dynamically allocating them according to need. So it's sort of like an electricity grid. I don't know if maybe Greg can help us a little bit with the English part of that cloud metaphor, but it's basically a hosted solution, right?
Exactly, and I mean, you were just referring to kind of the elastic nature of it to allocate resources as needed as customer systems scale up or down.
Okay, great. So that's basically what the cloud is, and it's a big part of Infor strategy, right? In their core tenets, it used to be called was it internet operability, and now they're referring to more of it as the cloud. But I think it's a couple very important things to recognize from Infor is that Infor is saying we are a business application, a software company. We're going to focus on that. We're going to leverage the market leader in providing these infrastructures and partner with them, which obviously makes a lot of sense in the short term. But there's even something beyond that which says because we are not in this space, we're able to take advantage of whatever else happens in the market in terms of this infrastructure providing in the future, right? And it's certainly something we can see Charles Phillips here with his quote saying, other vendors that are innovating are coming to us because we're not competing. So I think it's an important thing for their strategy, and it's important for those of us that are working with their product space to understand that there's going to be a lot of time invested in that strategy. So to cover SaaS here for a second, obviously there's an implied hosted nature to it, but at its core, what it is basically a licensing model, right? So it's the difference between buying and leasing, and it's popular with modern software models. Salesforce is probably the most commonly cited, where basically we don't provide software on site for you to install with all those complexities. We provide the whole solution. And that used to be what would break down into maybe hosting, managed services, internal administration, and maintenance for licensing is now just a subscription. So I think there's also the element of in the buy versus lease also affects on the accounting side whether it's a capital expense or not. But
right, which might be important in some instances, but obviously it's more than just the software. It's more than just the infrastructure. It's some managed services in there as well. It's just all kind of packaged together. It's your licenses plus everything to run it. And I think a lot of people are familiar with that concept now. And obviously, new software, that's how it's developed, right?
That's
new
how it's
software is not developed as the Lawson Bold as we know it. So there's a great transition that they're making.
It's an inherent challenge to the transition that when you develop software from the ground up with that model,
right,
you embed a lot of the services, and really that hasn't been the Lawson market for 20 years. So
exactly.
Anyway, let's keep going here. Just to point out one interesting thing, and I won't spend too much time here, is that the concept of hosting off-premise has actually been around for a long time. It's sort of taken different forms based on the infrastructure facets at different times. And when it first came around, what we always refer to as the large computing machines, it's really because, mostly around banks, they couldn't afford these big machines, a lot of space, a lot of time, a lot of money, so they consolidated it then. And obviously, advancements in computing and servers and technology allowed everyone to bring that in-house. When we see that flip back in the 90s, it's with the concept of ASPs, and they really took hold in the late 90s. There was also the term utility-based used then. But the concept then was a third party hosting this software vendor and achieving efficiencies of scale by having that talent pool that knew. So instead of having 20 system administrators in 20 different organizations, you have a dozen managing 20, and you achieve obviously some cost savings there.
But still kind of your dedicated servers, individual instances, really just hosted, and obviously the pipes of the internet are what started to make that possible. Still some challenges at that point in time that luckily we don't face now.
I mean, and that definitely brings us to a quick slide here on.
Right.
So what is the difference between ASPs and SaaS? And obviously, they're both hosted. ASPs tend to be third-party hosted, and traditionally they were for client-server applications. With SaaS, that's basically software as a service is vendor provided, right? So the only true SaaS is going to be Infor for Lawson in this case, and they tend to be web-based front ends. Now that's mostly because they were developed that way in the first place. Lastly, SaaS seeks this multi-tenant, whereas ASPs tend to have dedicated service. We know that's actually not completely true out there in the Lawson space, but theoretically it is. Let's talk about multi-tenant. It's something that I see a lot in Infor presentations, Mavis presentations to partners, right. And sometimes I question, so why do customers care about being multi-tenant?
Right. I mean, ultimately, it can reduce the underlying cost, right? Both from an infrastructure standpoint of sharing resources, as well as the time to deploy a standard model. But that does not mean that Lawson customers and you guys are going to be forced to go to a multi-tenant. What we're going to talk about is actually not multi-tenant at this point for the most part.
It's not multi-tenant.
You know, but that possibility, that shift can come, and that is something that Infor can gain a lot of efficiencies from a maintenance standpoint, as well as the initial setup and the underlying infrastructure costs.
Right. So right now, when we look at moving version 10 is not a multi-tenant design. It's part of this transition,
right.
So they can't do it. But when they look at long-term XI, that is one of their big goals.
Right. Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think one of the interesting things here is that we're sort of talking about paradigm shifting, and when the cloud stuff first came up, it's like, okay, well, this many years ago, it was actually Lawson Q, I think late 2000s, and I was pretty skeptical at the time. I mean, it was sort of new to our industry, and then we came around to this whole SaaS model for a business that's been around since the late 70s and had a very different model. I was very skeptical. Obviously, we're seeing this transition occur today. As of 2 months ago, there are already 40-plus customers, existing customers that had signed up to go from on-premise to hosted SaaS with Infor, over half of those in healthcare. It's clearly a trend that's happening, but I will point out that sometimes when paradigms shift, they don't shift exactly in the ways you expect them to, right? And I'm reminded actually of the music industry. Probably a lot of you in the late 90s had, like me, big stacks of CDs, right? Physical collections of music. I actually still have a ton in my garage. That's the only place they're allowed to live in my house, and I can't bear to get rid of them. And then maybe you guys remember what came around. I think it was late 1999, early 2000. It was computer software that actually allowed for the sharing of musical files, right? It was pirated at the time, and it was shut down pretty quickly, but it fundamentally shifted how people viewed music, right? Collecting and obtaining music. What's interesting, though, to me, is that in the short term, that shift was to what? It was from the physical CD, compact disc, things that came before it, to an electronic file that still had to be in a physical device. The short-term winner at the time was Apple, right? They had iTunes, they had the iPods, very popular, and a lot of us accumulated these giant directories of data files. I had upwards of 60 gigabytes of music, and MP3s, whatever the iTunes stuff was. But in the long term, that's not where it stayed. And it was about 5 years ago. I got a new PC, and I'm looking at transferring these files over, and borrowing one of those external hard drives. You guys probably remember those. And I'm talking to Mr. Richard Stout, and he says, "Why on earth would you want to have all these files on a fixed location that you may or may not have access to at any point, when you can listen to things anytime, anywhere, anytime you want it?" And what we see today actually is there are dozens of music streaming services that allow you to get that anywhere, right? So in the short term, it seemed like we understood what the transition was. In the long term, it was a little bit different. And even though we're speaking like we clearly understand where this all ends up, everything's always evolving. So anyway, thank you for bearing with my little story here. We want to swing it back to focus on Upgrade X, right? And so again, just looking at what Infor service offering is around this existing Lawson customer base. Let's just start with this term. It's been used a lot for us when we talk to Infor with some of our customers. I'm not sure how many of you have heard it, but basically, in a nutshell, Upgrade X is a triple play, right? And it talks about going from on-premise and migrating to the cloud, going from 9 to 10, and going from perpetual license to SaaS. That's really what a full Upgrade X is. As Greg pointed out earlier.
All at once.
All at once, all at the same time now.
Sounds a little scary.
Right, so this is infrastructure, this is system, and this is basically how you pay for it, right?
The licensing agreement, right.
So the things kind of make sense that they can be joined together. I think what's important is these are three things that Infor really wants to see its Lawson customer base do, right? And as we talk through this, it's because these are three things that you're checking off their list that they're willing to be very competitive in helping you do that. So now here, not to detour too quickly, but just to make sure we cover, we've heard a lot about these cloud business suites, right? At Inforum, there's these nice ads that say every cloud should be different. Lots of very interesting stuff. It's industry specific, and it basically is if Infor was designing Lawson today, at its core, it would be designing a SaaS product that would be industry-based, that would look like these clouds, right? And so how is that different than UpgradeX? Is it the same thing? Well,
not really.
Not really, right? So the cloud business suite, very important thing, it's a predefined solution footprint, right? So in the example of healthcare, you might have your FinPro, your S3HCM, your LTM, Cloverleaf, Ion, DEPM, right? These are all the products they have that fit this healthcare model. But the key about it is that by having this defined solution footprint, you can create a replicatable model to provision them. So just try to explain that in English. It's something we've talked about. Basically, every tech consultant out in the Lawson market for 10 years has talked about how do we make this a recreatable system, right? Because it takes so long to set up the Lawson infrastructure. And the cloud business suite is a way to do that, okay? When you look at UpgradeX, UpgradeX is basically catered to that existing customer base that's on-premise today.
Right, you guys.
Yeah, you guys, right? You guys, totally. And the license structure doesn't match this footprint, right? It's, you have FinPro, and maybe you added Punch-Out, and maybe at some point you decided you weren't using this product and you wanted it off your maintenance. And so UpgradeX is basically matching that license structure, right? And that cost as well, and migrating it up. So I think it's important. I think it's something that Lawson has done to make this work for that customer base. Only other thing that I'm going to add when you're thinking about this is this is quick to provision, right? This is replicatable. This isn't. This is like us building it out. So just concepts, right? If you are looking at some of these products right now very seriously, like you might want to move forward with these, I would definitely talk to your rep and say, okay, what if I went the cloud business suite? Because you could still make all these other things happen, right? You could switch your model, you could move to tenants, part of it. It could all be done through this, but UpgradeX is what we're seeing, most people follow, and we've taken the liberty here to quote an Infor slide since they're so visual. And you can see the very first thing that they point out is UpgradeX is ideal for new customers, whereas cloud suite is really meant for, sorry.
Yeah, UpgradeX for existing, right.
And then they also point out, what do they point out? That they're SaaS and cloud, right? So this is where they want to get everybody to. So let's go back and talk about the real question, right? So to cloud or not to cloud, basically for our audience today, comes down to, is the UpgradeX for me? And if we look at it through the prism of these three basic plays, these are the key decision points. So let's dive a little bit into each of these. I think that from a cloud perspective, it just totally makes sense to me, right? Personally, and if I could just offer my opinion here for a second, that at this point, I'm completely sold. First of all, that is the correct business model, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit in terms of how we provide software that supports businesses and business applications and lets businesses focus on core values. But even specifically, if I can drill down, right? I'm already saying, hey, I'm a crowd Kool-Aid drinker. I would especially be looking at it if I fit one of these various points. I mean, obviously, for a new customer where you're not migrating from already having on-premise, it's like, why train the resources? Why get the hardware? Get the system up faster. It just makes all the sense in the world, and I think we're going to see that as a large trend, and we're already seeing it with the new customer base. But I think that scale matters. I mean, there are different scales organizations hosting Lawson, and some of them are pretty significantly sized with their own data centers. Some of them have 20-plus people that support their Lawson system, right? So that's a little bit different type of footprint and organization than, say, if you're a small organization, maybe you have half an FTE that's like your Oracle DBA and is also maintaining Lawson on the side. And that also applies to anybody that is short-staffed. You lost your system admin, you're looking at a very expensive hire, very difficult to find them in a location or a managed services contract, or you have a project backlog, and you can reallocate these resources to be deploying. I mean, everybody should deploy RQC. Everybody should deploy ESA. These are great tools. They're out there, and the only thing stopping us is time, man, or money, right? Because as consultants, we can do those projects, but that doesn't mean internally organizations can't do them for themselves, and some do. It's just that maybe the resources they have assigned to Lawson are supporting the system instead of enhancing it. I think anybody that's already hosted, I think the ASP to SaaS, personally, I think that's obviously I'm not in the hosted business, and some of my competitors are, and potentially I'd feel a little bit different if we were trying to host. But if I'm a new customer or I'm looking at where to move forward, I just don't see how I go with a third party that's going to be in competition with what Infor is trying to do, instead of embracing where Infor is going and then maximizing my return on that. And obviously, they're able to consolidate all these separate costs into one place. They can do math that other people can't. And then the last thing that I'm going to point out is that I think is important is Microsoft is the direction of the short term, right? So when we talk about them not being an infrastructure company, from a hosting perspective, they're partnering with Amazon because they're a market leader, but they're also leaving themselves open to long-term to whoever new comes around, right? And I think the same thing will occur from a platform and database perspective. Certainly, Infor is embracing all open source to whatever extent they can. But there's a couple of realities that I think are very important. What Infor is hosting is on SQL and on Windows, right? I have Mr. Stout here to confirm. And so that's what the majority of new customers are going to be going in. That's what all the Upgrade X customers are going to be migrating to. And I'll add more. I mean, we've definitely seen on the on-premise market a strong preference towards moving to Windows. Windows, VMs, 2012 R2. I don't even totally know what that means. I know that's what customers want to move to. That's what they have. That's what they have other applications on. So not necessarily just saying if you're iSeries, but if you're maybe Unix shop or whatever, and you're not totally down with the Windows, I think maybe then you want to migrate to what Infor is going to support. And a very important thing that Stout was saying the other day is they're developing in Windows first, which is not. I don't know where he gets what his source is, but that is not the traditional 20 years ago, right? It was like this is developed in Unix, and then we make it work for Windows, and now it's Windows first. So that's the bandwagon that I think you want to be on.
Potentially the same reason that the customers are sometimes preferring Windows. They have VMs, right? They're easy to spin up some machines to do some testing, rather than bring in another big box.
Different disaster recovery options. And I'm going to let Stout here in a second to talk about the server architecture. The other thing that folks are talking about a lot is moving to Linux, and again, it's looking at this hardware cost. I think it's a big deal for them. It's the cost of hardware, and also what level of expertise do I have internally already for my other systems. And sorry.
No, exactly, and I think, as Keith mentioned in the beginning, I've probably internally been the biggest skeptic on the migration to the cloud over the last few years, but definitely coming around, and I think ultimately I think it's more a matter of when, not if. I just think that there are generally going to be very few organizations that won't be able to, or it won't eventually make sense to move to the cloud. It might not be right for you now. That's fine, but I was just listening to Charles the other day and saying that the CIA was moving some Lawson application over to the cloud. So obviously,
if it's good enough for them.
Exactly. So and I think we'll get into when we go into SaaS. I think it's starting to make sense.
Yeah, it's starting to make sense.
And it's a matter of when.
I think we'll talk about that in a second. Actually, we have a special guest appearance here from Mr. Richard Stout that's going to talk about another reason to move to the cloud. And what reason is that, Mr. Stout?
Thanks. Thanks, Keith. I've been quoted several times in this presentation, so I'm very happy to join you up here today. Let's talk a little bit about Lawson system architecture and how it's evolved over the past couple of years. It's certainly the Lawson 10 ecosystem that we're building out today really does not resemble what the system looked like 15 years ago when some organizations had first implemented Lawson. If we look at in the late 90s, with Lawson version 7. It was pretty much a self-contained client-server application. The core applications, the COBOL code running typically on a Unix backend, and our user interface was lid, right? A simple command, text-based interface.
So what were you saying earlier was like we had AOL.
Right. We had we
had AOL and we had lid.
Right.
We still have lids sometimes. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. It was a pretty simple system back then, and as time moved on, things got a little bit more complicated. Here we are in the early 2000s, and we've upgraded to Lawson version 8, and we've embraced the web interface XML portal. We've added a web server into the mix, a web overlay over our core COBOL code, and that's introduced some more desktop dependencies on browser.
I mean, it was really important at the time, right? To stay modern, you
Absolutely.
had to be web-enabled, and so that was the way that they were able to do that.
Yeah, and fully embracing the web delivery model, organizations started to implement self-service applications. Mm-hmm. So we look at maybe adding ESS or RSS into the mix, introduced another client, another browser compatibility thing to track into the Lawson system. If we move forward a little bit more, our core Lawson looks the same, but we've added a couple of add-on modules. Here maybe we've implemented Lawson Business Intelligence, a collection of various BI products that at its heart is Crystal Reports application server. Maybe we've implemented mobile supply chain management, which is then brought in a dependency on a wireless network, handhelds, Windows Mobile OS. And these add-on applications were oftentimes implemented on a Windows backend, even for those organizations running Lawson on Unix. This is when the Lawson environment started to become heterogeneous as far as platforms go.
Heterogeneous, you mean the opposite?
Yeah, meaning mix, like not the milk.
Okay.
Yeah, not homogeneous.
Not homogeneous. Okay, got it. Sorry.
But heterogeneous.
Okay. Okay.
So moving forward.
Okay, history and an English lesson here, I get. Yeah.
Yeah. Moving forward, maybe about 5 years ago, big splash at Q was the new desktop client for Lawson Smart Office, right? So maybe some organizations implement Smart Office. Smart Office has to run on Windows. That's introduced another desktop compatibility into our mix. Relies on the .NET framework for the client. So now our basic client server application has expanded out to more and more servers, more and more platforms and environments. And if we look at what a typical Lawson 10x environment looks like today.
Oh, the pièce de résistance.
Yes. Now we've added a couple more servers in the mix. We've got Landmark. Landmark is the Justin's eating a sandwich. Landmark is the application server that powers our next generation workflow application Infor process automation. We've got Mingle, which is our new web front end framework. Mingle is based upon SharePoint, which of course will only run on Windows. Also introduces SQL Server as a requirement for the first time. So regardless of your back-end database platform, for Lawson apps, be it DB2, be it Oracle, now you've got to bring a Microsoft SQL Server into the mix to support Mingle. So as you can see, our lowly Lawson environment has really expanded out, and this is just one environment, right? This doesn't take into account disaster recovery, virtualization, test environments, dev environments.
It also doesn't take into account, if you're looking at workforce management, DEPM, Cloverleaf. I mean, but really the net message here, other than the really awesome slide, is it's gotten complicated, the architecture behind this, right? And to maintain it and to keep it up to date. I think one of the things that maybe gets lost in the shuffle as we talk about just the amount of servers and clients, because you can never have too many clients, right, is that each one of these components from a software perspective, there's multiple versions, there's multiple underlying requirements, and obviously a lot of our businesses is the infrastructure business, and one of the things that we complain about a lot is every time there's a little version change on one piece, it affects how it connects with the other, right?
Yeah.
Some of the underpinnings of Java,
Definitely. I mean, with an ecosystem this size, maintainability is definitely a different level. You look at doing a wave of cyclical patches, once a year. There are a lot of interdependencies, not only in the various Lawson versions. Looking at doing a ISS update, you might have to apply a Landmark CU or a core technology update just to support that. But as well with third-party dependencies, you've got Microsoft versioning you have to take into account. All of the other pieces of software, the versions need to line up. That's an exercise that we go through a pretty comprehensive planning exercise when we kick off a Lawson 10 upgrade, just to map everything out to see what our 10 environment's going to look like and how everyth's going to fit together.
And it's always unique. It actually ties in with our next slide very well here, because so far when you had that old late 90s model before Napster disrupted it, right? We were responsible for that maintenance and uptime. We're responsible for those patches, right? We're responsible for those cyclical upgrades. And if you think about it, with that system architecture, it doesn't make any sense for me as a customer to be responsible for those things, right? It makes sense for the vendor to be responsible for those things, right? They're better positioned, they're better equipped, they're more scalable, it's their own software, they can troubleshoot their own issues. And I think the opposite also holds true, that some of the things that maybe we went to the vendor for, those consultative, if that's a word, type projects, right, to improve upon the software, improve the business processes, leverage more of the software, they actually make a lot more sense to be with the organization, right? So, when you look at internally, and this is something we're going to revisit a little bit, I think that when you look internally at your support structure, and that support structure being something about uptime, that doesn't make sense. I think it makes a lot more sense for that support structure to be about IPA development, automate business processes, roll out RQC, roll out ESS.
Absolutely.
And I have no doubt in my mind that 5 years from now, that's the way organizations are going to be constructed now. We'll be competing with those internal resources, but it makes more sense from an overall model.
How many thousands of people do we need out there who know how to apply a CTP? How many thousands of people out there do you think are better at rolling out e-requisitions in your organization than you are?
Right, exactly. So obviously from a cloud perspective, if you get me clear, we're pro-cloud. We definitely think that's the wave of the future. Let's get to the other two decision points. Now, one I think is pretty obvious, is the 10x. So let's just hit the 10x here real quick. Now let Stout and Greg chime in. But basically, we're seeing a massive wave of folks migrating to 10x right now. Obviously, if you're on this webinar, you're probably looking at your upcoming migration and deciding whether you want to go cloud or stay on-premise. Two main reasons people are migrating to 10x are hardware compatibility. Folks want to get on modern hardware, be it Linux, Windows 2012, VMs, and also then the mainstream support, which is officially May 2016.
May 2016.
Right. So I see this wave. It's cresting. It's going to be there for a while. I would say that there's been a lot of surprise at how long it takes, whether you're going to upgrade on-premise or you're going to go migrate to the cloud. There's sort of different considerations along the way, but either way, you're looking at a 6-month-plus project. So, and you're looking at a lot of competition for what the market can allocate. But it's very important, I think, to move to 10. And that is something that is part of Infor's development model, right? XI is going to be super awesome. We're already starting to see some of the stuff come out on that. We're very excited. It's still a couple of years away for most of the market. 10 is an important step to get to XI, right? Because it exposes you to a lot of the development tools that XI is going to take advantage for. So even though the business processes are basically the same, right, the tools we have available change. And I think important things about moving to 10 is IPA, getting good with IPA, configuration console, global HR. I mean, that's something you should be working on the next couple of years. This is going to familiarize you with this platform, with the concepts, with a business object-oriented software to let you take advantage of XI, right? And this iterative development model is very important, right? So sometimes we see 10, and maybe we look at all the stuff XI has that's a lot sexier. 10 is the stepping stone to get to XI.
Absolutely. I think we've been saying that for a couple of years. We just haven't had the end goal in our sights yet. And,
okay.
And now that we're starting to see what XI really looks like, I think this makes a lot.
Right. I mean, so XI, super exciting. And actually, our next round of webinars, quick plug, Cinco de Mayo. We're going to be talking some of what we learned about XI. We're going to be trying to do this cloud one again. So hopefully, some of you guys can see us then. You know, it's tough because I think that we are going to hear a lot about XI from Infor for a long time because it's got a lot of cool stuff, and people like to talk about cool stuff. But the reality is, it's a couple years out for most of the market, right? I mean, you'd have to be an early adopter in a unique organization to really be going at that now. I think right now you just position yourself for taking advantage of that when it comes, for taking advantage of that major investment that Infor has made in developing the software. Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the third and trickiest of the triple play, which is the SaaS. And you know, at first I struggled with, and I know Greg did too. Why would someone that already owns the car go back and lease it? So you know, I think there's a couple of things here. I'll let Greg. I'll let our resident skeptic talk about why lease the car here.
Right, exactly, because it's a little bit more than just leasing the car. It is a sunk cost. Your licenses that you've already purchased, but there's a lot more to it, right? It's your maintenance charge, but it's that infrastructure. It's more than maintenance is the actual server and application maintenance, and ultimately you're setting yourself up to be part of a model to adopt more software in the future, with more functionality going forward as well. And ultimately, I guess really a lot of what's turned me around are the numbers, and I've seen it look very attractive, and I was skeptical that the math was going to work, quite honestly.
But it has, you're saying.
It has. Yeah.
And I think that there's something to be said. Infor broadcasts a lot that they're the biggest startup in the world, and right. and when you dig into that message, it means they're not satisfied. They're hungry, right? They're not who they want to be. And to get to be who they want to be, which is a SaaS company, they're willing to make it work. I mean, again, not for everybody, but I would say if I'm a Lawson customer, I'll say, okay, what do these numbers look like? The math is pretty important.
Yeah. Forget about what what you might have paid to implement Lawson originally or buy the hardware you're on now. Just look at what are you paying in maintenance fees for the software, what are you paying in maintenance fees for maybe a proprietary hardware platform. Take a look at the resources it takes to support and keep the system up and running. I mean, add all that stuff together and compare it to the one number that you look at from
a SaaS perspective. I actually think that the one place where I defer a little bit is, and I know that's the standard, is when you look at the resource cost for the folks that are supporting the software. I don't actually look at that as a cost that gets compared. I just think of it as a shift, right? Those become your internal consultants and advocates, and they're best positioned to help your business leverage the software better than we are, right? I mean, they know your business best. So I'm more looking at it from a repurposing standpoint.
Yeah.
So I guess those are sort of three decision points. Want to cycle back a little bit to some considerations and how this happens. And one of the things that a lot of folks have been surprised to learn is that consulting partners can help you migrate to the cloud. Will help you with project management, planning the roadmap, data conversions, differences training, UAT, overall guidance. I think that partners are uniquely positioned to deliver these services because we've been doing very similar things for a long time, especially converting databases, upgrades, very familiar with 10, very familiar with the process, very familiar in working with Infor Labs and IPS and Infor support. And so I wouldn't underestimate the ability of a partner to be able to perform these projects on a cost-effective basis, and to be able to save you a lot a lot of time and heartache. And actually, Mr.
Yeah,
Mr.
look.
Justin Braun is in the house, so we're gonna ask him to make a guest appearance here, and maybe talk a little bit about what RPI's project approach for these types of projects is.
Yep, thanks, Keith. Obviously, we'd like to have a lot more to share on this, but part of what we do in our project management office is create transparency. So clearly, we're just getting started on figuring out how this lift and shift from your current on-premise to a cloud solution would look. We've been very fortunate to be engaged on some projects that are underway on that front right now. And our RPI project approach is similar to most projects, so I want to walk through that at a high level and try and focus on what's different from an on-prem to a cloud migration project. And at this point, the best thing I can do is point out some potential pitfalls, allude to some lessons learned that we have. I think the overall topic of version 10 upgrade, platform migration, project management fundamentals is a webinar all on its own, one that I've been told would be a good topic, actually. Not prepared for that today, but you know, quick 5 minutes. We start with assessment and project planning, where we like to lay down the fundamentals and engage your key stakeholders in sort of what we call project governance. What is the baseline project plan that stipulates the windows of activity that you can control? When do you need your users to be aligned to support the various rounds of testing? That's very important. I know end users, I work with them all the time. They like to have advance notice. One of the tenets of that advance notice is to let them know that, like any projects, things shift, things change. Start with a baseline plan, set the expectation that some of those windows might change. You might allocate on a standard 3 or 4 pass upgrade, let's talk about a 3 pass upgrade with 2 test cycles and your go live being the 3rd pass. You've got 2 cycles of testing. There's no time like the present to talk about what does that test plan look like. It's some iteration of your existing test plan enhanced to accommodate version 10 feature functionality. What will you test in the 1st pass versus the 2nd pass? You don't have to test everything in both passes of testing. You just want to test everything before you go live. So we set a baseline project plan. That should indicate windows of 2 to 6, maybe more weeks per test cycle. Get the buy-in from your users, let them know when that's going to occur, and then start with the baseline and then manage that plan. So we start with a baseline plan. We outline the testing plan, which we talked to. That's actually an area standalone that we're working with a lot of our clients on, whether you're doing an on-prem, whether you're doing a platform migration, going to the cloud, whatnot. What does a good, comprehensive, consolidated testing plan look like? You probably have your groups of users in the various functional domains that have different responsibilities. They might have their own way of doing things in testing. We strongly recommend having a consolidated plan that allows for like the one-stop shop of what's my percent complete of not only the business process scenarios or the use cases, but everything else. And I'll talk a little bit about everything else with a new acronym coming up on point 5. What is your training plan? Certainly you got to cover mingle navigation. You got to cover application differences. By and large, those are pretty easy. That's kind of a slam dunk. It's not uncommon to see a training budget in a project like this of 30 hours or less, because the fact is the application has not changed tremendously. But don't forget that per that slide we saw earlier with all the new infrastructure, depending on where you are and where you're headed, there might be some local system admin type training around, just so your folks understand the nuance of landmark to LSF, ISS, user authentication, for example. So don't forget the technical component of your training plan. And the reason we go through test cycles is to bring issues to the surface before we go live. So we certainly recommend having a good, transparent issues management process going in. So we set that foundation, that baseline. System provisioning and build, point 2. That's obviously different in the cloud. It's one of the benefits of the cloud. They can do it with the press of a button. Boom, there's your new server. Presumably, that will authenticate through ADFS with your Active Directory on your local infrastructure to the cloud. Perhaps some wrinkles to be worked out as you set all that up, so allocate some time. And obviously, the test migration cycles are critical. What are you talking about in a test migration cycle? The tools that you have today, lift and shift. That's what you have. So if you have 200 gigabytes of data in your Lawson database, you have to figure out a way to export that, FTP it up to the cloud, import it into your NewSQL database over a weekend, right? That's one of the biggest unknowns of this cloud migration project that we're all working through. Infor, all the partners, and the clients that are in this cycle right now, right? So plan accordingly to that. What we recommend from a project management perspective is a report card. So whoever you're using for your implementation partner to the cloud, each pass, whether you're doing 3 passes or 5, you want a scorecard that says, these are the steps we did. This is when we started step 1. It took 6 hours, etc. You want that scorecard each time. Eventually, that scorecard evolves into your go live cutover plan. It's also a very key piece of diligence to know that, yes, we can commit to this go-live date, and yes, I can communicate to my users that I need 3 or 4 days of downtime instead of 1 or 2 days of downtime. Because, again, we're not aware of any incremental data load from your on-prem up to the cloud. Our understanding is it's strictly a lift and shift, so depending on the size of your database, could directly impact the size of that window. And that's certainly an important point that we bake into the plan. And be prepared to adapt. The next one, what is RICE? That's just an acronym that's very helpful. Keep in mind, through a project like this, you're going to be communicating within different sub-organizations at Infor. So you might be working with Infor Consulting Services. You might be working with Infor AMS, the application management team. You might be working with Infor GSC. Hopefully everyone at Infor, one of the things that comes to the surface early on is this RICE document. Reports, interfaces, customizations, and extensions. Those are also tabs or subject areas that you want to make sure are included in your test plan. And you're generally starting to look and document and kind of create an inventory of all those reports, interfaces, customizations, and extensions, such as LBI, such as MSCM, such as an interface to your bank file, such as a smart office customization, what have you. COBOL customizations, how those migrate to the cloud, also park that in the category of unknowns at this point. But get those fleshed out early and incorporate into your test plan and just start working with your stakeholders to talk about exactly how any existing customizations you have are going to move up to the cloud. We recommend 3 cycles of testing before your go-live commitment. Sometimes you might have 3, 2 tests and 1 live. There's also the question of your future version 10 test environment, which we believe one of the easiest ways to handle that is you do all of your test migrations from, say, your version 9 prod to your version 10 prod. So in that sense, your version 10 prod is a pre-prod, and that's your project playground for all of your testing cycles. You might need to stand up different product lines or data areas. That gives you the benefit of then timing the right time to take version 10 prod and copy that environment or data areas into a test environment, which obviously we recommend having in place before you go live. So those are some of the considerations that are coming up as we're working through some of these cloud migrations. And
it's very, very, very helpful, Mr. Braun. Thank you. A couple more things that I just want to, since we have you here, maybe talk about is some of these overall considerations. I think that a lot of the folks that are on here today are probably weighing this decision on whether this is the right time for them to perform a cloud migration. And up here at the top, I think there's a couple things that I just maybe you can help us address. Is in terms of timeline, these are pretty serious projects.
Yes. Yeah, they're.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
yes.
No,
you're right. You're right.
If I had one that I could tell you what the lead time was, complexities where I would. But I think a 6-month minimum is a reasonable expectation. Again, focus on what you can control. The big data crunch. I'm sorry. The big timeline crunch is going to be around those data migrations. So when do you time those? Keeping in mind that that those are a snapshot of your data. So you're in version 10 pre-prod, and that's an instance of your version 9 product line, right before you finished your last payroll, last pay cycle or something. So it's all time sensitive. But migrating that data is definitely a time-consuming activity. So if you have 3 passes, perhaps 6 months is appropriate. If you're planning for 5 or 6 passes, that's probably going to take longer. But yeah, they're definitely.
And the size matters, and also, I mean, you are going to SQL at the end of the day. So right, so if you're on SQL already, that's a little bit of a shorter hop.
that's the other factor. If you're going SQL to SQL, that helps a lot. If you're going Oracle to SQL, that is a factor that you need to bake in. That there's a little bit more time. There's more onus on the testing to make sure that the database migration was successful. It's not like to like, so there are some peculiarities when you move from one database platform to another that ultimately usually end up taking more time.
So let me throw this for a bigger loop here. If I stay on premise and I'm on Oracle today, would you say, hey, if you make that conversion to go to SQL, it'll make a hop to the cloud easier later if you want to choose that option, not right now, but 2 years down the line, then it becomes a lot simpler. If I'm already on 10, I'm on SQL, than if I try to stick it out with Oracle.
Yeah, I mean, I'll toss that to Stout too.
Maybe
Gotta share the mic.
We don't
Yeah,
have
sorry.
2 mics. Maybe some of that depends on how much custom development have you invested in that's directly related to the database platform.
Okay.
Reports.
Okay.
Interfaces.
Okay.
That could be a big development effort to get it transferred over.
True.
To.
But it would be a big development effort to get it transferred to the cloud. And one of the things that for both of you, when Justin was talking about the RICE acronym, is when we look at on-prem 10 upgrades, right? If they have a bunch of 4GL programs, we're basically just trying to migrate those and seeing what breaks. But when you're doing the upgrade X, you're really looking at what's the underlying need for these customizations, or a reason, and then what makes sense, right? So it's more of a long-term solution than a patch, right?
Yeah, it is. And another area in that same respect is what we're starting to see is sometimes you'll see a process that's ingrained, it's in place, and this is how we've done, for example, payroll for the last 10 or 15 years. And when you know it, it relies on all this customization. If that fits your profile, I would recommend engaging some process consultants right up front prior to the version 10 differences training, just to assess your process, because you might have an opportunity to, throughout the course of this upgrade, do some business process reengineering, which at the end of the day is going to save you a ton of time rather than recreating whatever costly customizations are running your business today. So that's another factor that's very hard to stand up here and tell you that you should plan X number of weeks or months for that, because it just totally depends. But if you see those warning signs around a potentially broken process, my recommendation is get some good advice around that. You don't want to, just like you don't want to, implement a new system with a bunch of bad data in it. If you have a bad process, it doesn't make sense to migrate that custom process to the cloud.
Great.
So,
I mean, I think that fits in with the other thing, which is, the organizational project roadmap matters. It matters from a resource constraint perspective, always. We all know that. But also from a Lawson perspective. If you're looking at doing archiving, that's something you might want to do before you migrate. If you're looking at doing that process reengineering, it's something you might do before, and then you got to look at the overall timing and where that puts you. A couple other things too. When you're looking at this decision point, I think that I would assume that if I was in the position where I was trying to evaluate this, 2 big things for me would be pros and cons, and what the math looks like, and that's something I'll let Mr. Greg Pollard talk about for a second that we can assist with, right? And obviously we know that that Infor provides value engineering, and they do the ROIs, and that's all great. But if you want some help from a third party to sort of talk through your situation, what those true hardware costs are and so forth, and what your architecture might look like specifically, or what your options might be, because we see folks that have a lot of environments. We advise them to reduce the number of environments if they really need it. So obviously something we can help you. It can be a quick hit. It's right up Greg's alley, which is basically working with numbers. So just keep us in mind for that. And I don't know what I did with the clicker. And I think one thing that I would focus on, regardless of if you move to the cloud today or not, is long term the internal client business, and I know I've repeated this a couple times, of patch and system uptime is going away, right? If you're a Lawson resource, if you're RPI, right, the infrastructure business long term is going away. If you're RPI, you got to focus on process automation, actionable reporting, process improvement, phase 2 modules, and it goes the same for everyone internally. So, if you're a system admin, get you to an IPA training class and start working with that right away is my advice. And I don't think this has to be the end of the role. It's just a shift, and it's about navigating that shift. And our very last slide We're throwing in here the compliance geek out for Mr. Pollard. I don't know if you want to say anything about.
Yeah, just real quickly, I'll go ahead
You're
and
not on
stay
the
off.
screen.
Okay, I'll
more
get back on camera here, but again, going back to that, why Amazon, why AWS, and I just wanted to quickly mention, I don't know if anybody saw Charles Phillips last week on CNBC, but he did have a little interview, and really the questions that they were asking were, why are you not building out your own cloud? Why are you not building out your own infrastructure? And really the take was that that's what companies used to do. If anybody had to redo it again, they would rely on Amazon or another provider and not be in that business, concentrate on the software. So, and I think that this is part of the reason. Why would you, as a software company, want to maintain all of this compliance? Obviously, there's certain aspects that the software has to comply with as well, but why not leverage Amazon and have all that safety built in and their responsibility?
So what you're saying is that RPI is also going to do a compliance thing so that we can get our logo up on the Amazon.
Right. So as you all migrate to the cloud, we're going to have a lot less business, and we're just going to start to be compliance. A compliance company.
That seems like the better business to be in.
Right here.
So yeah, and thank you guys so much for your time. We'll just open it up here for questions. Got to get Mr. Braun's card in there too, but got a few of them up there. So yeah, do we have any questions?
We have a few questions. So the first one is about customization, and if an organization is still able to access custom programs, custom interfaces, things like that, using Unix command lines.
So that is a great question. I'm going to go with no on the Unix command lines because there's no Unix. It's all, you still have a lid. Okay. Okay. You wanna? Can we borrow the mic? You need a mic. Yeah. Sorry. We got to get a fourth mic next time.
Yeah. I guess this isn't totally new in that organizations that have moved from an AIX and Oracle backend to Lawson managed services, the traditional cloud route from that's been available for a couple of years, have done this migration before. We've worked with companies that have done this migration before. The Windows platform that has a Unix interoperability layer which powers some components of LSF. LSF it's come a long way, and you can definitely see its Unix roots even in the Windows world. I'm going to say that it's like 80-90% there. So if you have a lot of shell scripts that you run, maybe you have custom tokens and Lawson Job Scheduler that are kicking off shell scripts that are running FTP jobs. Maybe 80-90% of that code will migrate without issue. Definitely.
Those FTP jobs can be an issue as well, though, right?
Because
Amazon is, yeah. So there's sort of different layers of this.
Yeah.
And I think that just to address the proactively the 4GL, the reality is that Infor would rather you not, but they'd rather you move to their SaaS cloud model than stay on-prem. So I think they will accommodate. But I think as a long-term strategy, you just want to look at what are the tools the preferred tools for supporting whatever business process customizations are required.
Yeah. Well, I mean, organizations that have invested heavily in case development, maybe create their own module, that doesn't rule you out from going to the cloud.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah, that's still possible.
Not at all.
And I'm just going to ask one more question since we're running out of time. But security.
Yeah.
How would you convince upper management that it's safe and secure to go to cloud?
So I'm gonna just refer to Greg here real quick. The CIA is migrating to the cloud. So, I don't know if it's good enough for the CIA. It seems like it should be good enough for everyone else. And I think that I'll also point out to the healthcare industry that's been widely embraced in the healthcare industry, and in part, we're sort of somewhat in our Lawson bubble, but it looks like the patient accounting side has been moving in that direction for some time. So I think that when you look at the level of regulations and liabilities that are involved for healthcare, with HIPAA compliance and so forth, the fact that they feel comfortable moving says a lot for most other industries. And obviously maybe you have something that's just crazy secure, you don't want to do it, but I think that you saw that slide from Amazon. There's a lot of companies that are up there, pretty safe at this juncture.
Yeah, I mean, it's just there's definitely the lines have been blurred between on-premise and cloud hosting anyway. I mean,
They're more secure than you are, potentially.
Potentially, I mean, it's even with on-premise software, you might have exposed some of that out to the internet, either with mobile applications or self-service. You probably have some sort of VPN or Citrix solution. Other things you have to worry about. People being physically in your environment, being able to connect up to the network anyway. There's just so many factors, and I think Amazon has a proven track record. And just look at what's happening in the EHR space. I mean, if that area can move into the cloud, I would say the back office is pretty much natural.
Right. So I want to thank everybody for attending. I hope you guys enjoyed this webinar. We'll be delivering a recording, and I hope you can join us back 3 weeks from now. Tuesday, Cinco de Mayo, we're going to be looking to do a few of these. We're going to include a webinar on 10x technical differences, a lot of detail from Mr. Stout, and also we're going to be talking about XI. Look forward to seeing you guys then. Thank you.
Thanks.